WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin, flying solo right now. Tia Graham returns to join us on Wednesday. But today on the program, we've got a new video game centering around Detroit and more specifically Detroiters. We're going to talk to the creator of that game about the inspiration and Detroit's place in the world of video games. But first on the Metro, auto companies and government agencies want electric vehicles to be the cars we drive. 3 years ago, Ford and GM declared EVs the cars of the future, and a law was passed that made it easier to purchase electric vehicles. Even President Joe Biden test drove a Ford F-150 EV. The plan was to shift to electric vehicles as fast as we could, but in reality, this hasn't been the truth, at least not yet. American EVs are selling at a lot slower than anticipated pace by major auto companies, and that's led to a push toward hybrid cars. It's also disrupted the EV-based jobs market, particularly those tied to manufacturing batteries. So, where is Michigan at exactly with EV sales, and what is the construction like with battery plants currently? To discuss this, we have Paula Gardner with us. She's the business reporter for Bridge, Michigan. Paula, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning.
So can you break down for us, Paula, EV sales and what have they looked like over the past year for companies, especially here in Michigan, Detroit, with GM and Ford specifically?
Yeah, I think the word I like to use right now is churn. I think that conveys it. Things go up, things go down. But ultimately, the sales are pretty much plateauing when you look across the entire, like all of the automotive dealers. We hear, certain manufacturers are seeing spikes, but other ones are seeing losses. But basically, EV sales have plateaued, which in turn has caused some problems with projections for automakers looking to increase their capacity, increase their investments, produce more batteries. The whole chain there has been disrupted. So like General Motors, for example, has done better than expected over the past month. I think their most recent sales results showed, a really nice increase in sales. I think it was 40% month over month. This year, they're probably close to flat. I haven't seen Ford numbers yet, but Ford already has delayed some projects, notably the huge factory in Kentucky that made Michigan jealous and made Michigan try to appeal to more of the auto manufacturers and try to get more of the battery factories. It, of course, got Ford to commit to a Marshall battery factory, which was delayed and downsized. So just things are changing very rapidly, but not in the right direction yet.
And I think this is what has people here concerned, because one of the things we thought about with this transition to EVs was not only the environment, but maybe Michigan could be on the forefront of this emerging technology, especially if the government was investing in it. So if we're looking at opportunities for course correction, or at least what the industry thinks is at issue here, what have you been hearing or seeing from them in terms of what needs to be corrected?
One of the big things that needs to be corrected is the number of chargers out there. The mood toward EVs has also changed. People have been receptive, recognizing that it's a new technology. It's something that is in development. And this is going back 10 years. It's something that's coming up. That's on the forefront. We're getting closer and closer to it becoming a bigger option out there. But the chargers have not kept up. So people are still not confident enough to be able to say, I want an EV for my primary vehicle. I want an EV for most of my driving. It still remains, for a lot of people, something that could be more specialized or something that is just occasional. It's a good second vehicle for many people, but there's still a lot of planning involved. I talked to somebody recently who lives in northern Michigan and was coming to Kalamazoo for a business meeting. He had to plan out exactly where he would charge, and it wasn't as easy as you would think all these years into EVs and all these years into announcements of a robust charging network coming to the state. So that's just one of the big changes because it affects buyers, it affects the mindset, it affects who is willing to adopt this technology.
Yeah, it's when you have a current car right now, you don't have to worry about mapping out anything versus with EVs. That's what I've heard also, the ability to know that, hey, if I want to drive to St. Louis, I can just get up and go versus needing to map this out. So when we think about infrastructure, right, for these chargers, as you mentioned, gas stations are already there. They have all of the pumps. I mean, are we thinking of ways to roll out more chargers? Would it be just popping them up in gas stations? Do we know what's preventing getting more of a network up for these chargers and what people are looking to do to fix it?
One of my colleagues wrote about this recently, and she just found that they're very expensive right now. Public charging is very, very expensive, and just not that easy. There are some businesses that are taking the leap, thinking that they make a natural stop. And actually, I had a friend of mine text me about a laundromat in Onekama, Michigan, which is north of Manistee. They have 2 chargers outside. So the state and the federal government are trying to make things appealing to businesses, to places that could put public charging up. But it's still the expense, the time lag. There's this huge gap out there still, even though the desire, I think, and the funding is there.
Yeah, we're speaking with Paula Gardner, who's the business editor for Bridge Michigan. And Paula, when I think about, part of this discussion is just this infrastructure and battery chargers or battery creation, actually, that we're thinking about in the state. We also discussed hybrid vehicles as maybe an alternative for folks who are a little concerned about being able to make that distance, at least with a hybrid. Gas kicks in. What is it about these hybrid vehicles when it comes to the creation of the batteries, right? Are they using the same batteries that would be constructed for fully electronic vehicles? Could that be a way that we could still have these battery jobs come here? Or what does that look like in terms of hybrid and how it would affect that industry?
Yeah, I never pretend to be an electrical engineer,
Sure.
first off. But, the automotive companies are seeing hybrids as an option, and I'm not sure about the battery production of it, to be honest. I think it's possible, but that just opens the door. Environmentally, it's not where we need to be, but it is somewhere that is kind of like that bridge. It's the gateway vehicle to get people towards EVs, and I think a lot of car shoppers and a lot of automakers recognize that's now an option where they may have turned their nose up at it a few years ago. So it's happening, but there have been the hybrids made and developed over time, and they don't. From what I understand, they don't necessarily need a lot of the new factories, a lot of the new manufacturing. They would kind of upgrade what they have. So I think that's a little bit questionable about whether Michigan could reap a ton of reward, or at least the expected reward right now, that it once placed at the EV realm.
Yeah, and I think another reason people thought that EVs would be so good, at least in the business world, was because, again, that government investment. You could get, for example, all of these rebates, for example. However, it's been a little bit tighter in terms of the rebate market, what's eligible for that. How much of an impact has the change, or first of all, could you describe for us a little bit of the change that's happened in terms of ability to get rebates from the government on EVs, and how has that affected the market?
The number of models were really limited just because of the components that had to be made in the U.S., which was also going to change over time. But those rebates are a factor, and I just saw a headline this morning about Lucid Motors increasing their monthly EV sales, and they have dropped their prices. But they also advertise, here's what you can do. Here's how you can lease one of our vehicles, and here's how the lease price is actually affected by the rebate, which I think is important to connect the dots for people so that people can actually jump into the market and, recognize it as an option.
Another way to get people to jump into the market, Paula, is used vehicles. And one thing that I think we're also seeing here is now that there are more EVs that have been out and about for a few years now, the used market sales are increasing. And I'm seeing from what I've heard that you can get some pretty good prices on those, or at least the market is falling there. What are we seeing in terms of used EVs? And do we think that could maybe be a gateway? Or are people saying, hey, if folks can get in a little bit cheaper, maybe that will increase what we need to increase this network for EVs and charging stations?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think people are watching it very closely right now too. So if I believe if I'm open to buying an EV, but I believe the technology is going to advance so dramatically that they are going to be cheaper in 5 years and they're going to get me a better charge, I might look on the used market right now but if I don't buy one on the used market, I probably won't buy one, new either. So it's kind of almost creating a gap where people are willing to say, I'm hitting the brakes because I think it's going to advance so dramatically over the coming years. So the used EV market, possibly a gateway, possibly just a way to, get the potential buyers out there into the secondary market and not buying EVs. So people are watching it pretty closely. And, a lot of the used market is still former fleet vehicles.
Right.
Auto rental companies like Hertz, they ditched so many of their EVs recently, and they have to go somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that aspect of it also, so that could be a way to get into that market. But the bottom line is the real big reason here, of course, American infrastructure and industry, increasing that, but also the environmental impact, really important to try to get people off of these vehicles. So with stagnation happening right now in the industry, as we're talking about, what's the look from the federal government? Has there been any response, especially with it being an election year right now? What is their posture in terms of maybe trying to help juice these sales or get this industry started for the benefits that we've all been thinking about with EVs?
I guess when I think of the federal government right now, me and possibly many other people, we're all looking at the election and thinking, hold up, let's see what happens here, because because EVs also have been politicized. And, the Biden administration has set the stage for EVs to be funded, for automakers to be incentivized to build these factories and to make their shift, which is a global shift. They're not just doing it because the president said to. So that's happening. But there's another candidate out there who has been publicly against EVs and at times, sometimes supporting, sometimes not, and a lot of questions about what the policy changes the policies will look like in November. I just read something about, a lot of people are just embracing the uncertainty right now and saying, I've got to hold up. I don't know where this is going.
Yeah. Well, Paula, I know that this conversation not only was good because of the content, but also working in shifting and brakes as well in the conversation about vehicles. I really like that. I see what you're doing there, Paula. So Paula Gardner, business editor for Bridge, Michigan, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET, and coming up, there's a new video game about to launch, set in Detroit, made by Detroiters for Detroiters. We're going to talk about that video game and the world of video games in terms of Detroit when we continue.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at the University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new Master of Science degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. Admission is open to qualified applicants with a bachelor's degree in any field. Course selection is flexible, with no prerequisites, 4 required courses, and 6 electives. Learn more at business.udmercy.edu.
Here at Shortwave Space Camp, we escape our everyday lives to explore the mysteries and quirks of the universe. We find weird, fun, interesting stories that explain how the cosmos is partying all around us. From stars to dwarf planets to black holes and beyond, we've got you. Listen now to the Shortwave Podcast from NPR.
If we're gonna make it back to Detroit, I'm gonna need your help.
I keep it going like
Try to keep up.
I keep it going, then bringing me down. I keep on flowing like I live in it now. Like a river, I be dripping in style. I'm running wild now, I'm on the way either way, cause I took a different route. Say it loud, I say it proud, I'm never gonna quit.
Imagine a world where you're set in a kingdom, but that kingdom isn't home. Detroit is. That's the universe players enter when they play the video game We Never Yield. Two brothers were removed from power as kids and are a journey to reclaim it now. And to do so, they must return to Detroit. Interestingly, it's not the only video game set in Detroit. In fact, a little later this hour, we're going to discuss some of those games. But before we get there, we want to explore this new title, We Never Yield. And to do so, we have the creator, Neil Jones, also known as Aerial Knight, with us. Neil, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, I'm happy to have you. Video games are something that a lot of us grow up with, and we want to get into that game. But before we get into the game, I need to know more about Aerial Knight, right? Because most of the knights I'm aware of ride horse. So what are you doing in the air? Where does the name Aerial Knight come from?
Oh, Aerial Knight was my gamer tag growing up. So like Xbox 360 days, I just kind of picked a random name.
You picked a good one.
Yeah. I was really young and I picked the amazing name. So, it's kind of always followed me. That was what my friends called me.
Yeah.
So when starting this thing, I wanted to kind of really name it.
Yeah. Well, in terms of video games, like I said, a little later, we're going to get into some of the history of games set in Detroit. But when I was doing the research and looking back at my memories of games from Detroit, a lot of them are made by creators out of state and frankly out of the country, just choosing Detroit for their settings.
Yes.
But you're someone who's local here, and that has some intentionality for you that to make a game in Detroit. Why was it important for you to create a video game in Detroit?
Yeah, Detroit is amazing. I grew up here. I went to Mumford, grew up right off the lodge. And it's really important to have representation in video games, not only with the people, but with the places. We see LA a lot. We see New York a lot. Detroit is a very important and interesting place, and the people of Detroit are very important and interesting as well. And I want to show that in video games for once, because we don't have many video games where we actually show the people, show like how we talk, show the culture. It's a small game, I'm a small developer, but I did the best I could to represent that as best I could.
And when you say small developer, are you one of those guys who's just making this by himself? You got a team? How are you even creating a game? Because the idea of doing it solo to me just seems crazy.
Yeah, so for the first game that came out a couple years ago called Never Yield, I did that completely solo, released it on all platforms. But for this game, I actually had a small budget because of all the support I got from the first game, and got to work with some amazing people to bring this even more to life and do a lot more with the concept.
We're going to talk a little bit about the specifics of the game because I did see the trailer. I heard the music. We got to hear it a little bit at the beginning of this episode. Got me hyped. So first of all, great job choosing your sounds. Before we get into this specific game, though, let's think about the process of creating a video game, because I'm always amazed when I hear stories about folks like you, small teams making games that have so much polish in their look. Are we looking at Detroit having more of a foundation now in terms of creating video games, or what have you seen in terms of the world of video game development? Because I feel like there's got to be support that you need in order to create these things also.
Yes, the process of creating a game is very long, as you can imagine. It takes many different skills. I often say that video games are a combination of all forms of media combined into one. So you kind of have to have a foot in every kind of foothold. But as far as moving forward in Detroit, and Detroit's like future in game development, I think game development is moving more remote. So it's a lot easier for people to work with people all across the world and skill sets, so that you don't have to like move to Detroit to do a certain thing. And the more remote things get, I think the more inclusive or accessible video games will be to create.
Yeah. Well, tell me about We Never Yield. What's the plot behind this game? What were you trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So in the first game, it was about two brothers pretty much having this conflict in Detroit and kind of just run amok through Detroit, destroying the city.
Yeah.
But in this game, it's all about making amends with each other, working together to get back home. They're teleported to this magical kingdom. When I was growing up, I always had these fantasies of what if I was more? What if I was like a secret prince or some kind of like king in hiding? And I kind of want to bring that to reality in this game where these two characters found out that they're princes, that they have this royal lineage and they have powers.
Yeah.
And they're teleported to this world and they're just trying to make it back home.
You know, you reference the first game a lot here when you talk about the games. Is this something where I need to play the first game in order to get something out of the second game? How would you recommend that I go about playing these games?
Yeah, they're two completely different things. You don't have to play the first game to play this game. All that's needed is a knowledge of video games in general, of like how kind of like the runner actiony type of games work.
Yeah.
But even if you don't have that, this is kind of fun to watch.
Well, that's what I also want to get into because, you know, when we've got people listening, I'm sure some who are very familiar with video games, especially this, I looked at it, runs at a faster pace. Maybe some who are a little bit more intimidated, don't know. Hey, I haven't reached in. The only way I played games, I had a Wii once, you know, I was playing a little bit of Wii Sports with my grandchildren. It was fun. I don't know. Who would you recommend this game for and how to get into it?
So if you play any games before, like even if you play arcade games, I feel like you'll find a good natural fit for this game. We have a lot of different options for people who just want to casually play. We have the harder core options for those, you know, gamers who play all the time. But the key point of this game was to kind of make it accessible to anybody who wanted to play, and you can play your own way.
Yeah, we're speaking with the creator of the video game We Never Yield, Neil Jones, also known as Aerial Knight. Neil, I am struck by the fact that the two main characters or the protagonists in this game, they are black.
Yeah.
Representation in video games, it's been a little bit of a struggle from time to time, I can say personally, you know, looking back to the amount of times I've played as Caucasian characters versus playing as someone who's black. A little bit harder to get there. Intentional decision for you. Why was this important? Why did you set it that way?
Yeah, I just wanted to make something different, something that I knew. I think people write the best stories about things that they relate to or experiences that they've been through.
Yeah. Except you've never been a prince, Neil.
Not that I know of, but, you know.
But I do love the idea that in video games, it gives you the opportunity, like you mentioned, to set yourself in different perspectives also, really kind of like that merging of something you see in film, but you get to be a part of it. Can you tell me for you, what is it that you're able to accomplish in a video game that you might not get in other media like a movie or a book or anything like that?
It's more about playing at your own pace, you know, creating your own story, finding the lore. There's a lot of hidden lore in the game, and people who are interested in story, they can go down that route of looking for like what actually happened to this kingdom and all the people of this kingdom, and it's all in the game. Yeah. But if you're just interested in playing the game and kind of running through these levels, that's there as well. If you're just interested in playing with someone else and having fun that way, games give you a lot of different options of how you can enjoy it and replay it, because you can play a game twice and have two different experiences.
Well, let's talk about people who are trying to get in the world of making video games. You're a developer. I mean, did you go to school for this? Did you learn on your own? What tips would you have for someone who wants to get into the world of making video games?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think you have to go to school for this, but I would say school is a good way to learn all the aspects of things and get experience working with people. But just advice for getting into it is just find what you like. You know, like some people like art, some people gravitate towards code, but there's a lot of non-art and code roles in gaming in general. There's marketing people, there's like people who go out and show the game and play games for people, you know, like that. So there, like, it really depends on what you want to do, and like there's a lot of different roles from film to transitioning to video games that people can make that transition if they like as well.
Yeah, well, you know, I know that I saw your game available on Steam, which is a PC platform for people who want to download it. Yeah. What is this game, We Never Yield Again? What are the platforms that it's available on? How can people find out more information about it?
Yeah, so if you type in We Never Yield or Never Yield into Google, it should pop up on all those platforms. But it's coming out on Steam, Epic Game Store, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox X and S, and more coming soon if it does well.
All right, an opportunity to play as Detroiters trying to get back to Detroit. Detroit references all in there, I'm sure. If I turn it on, I'm going to hear someone say, "What up, though?"
Yeah, that's the first thing that you hear. And hey, the Lodge is in there.
All right.
Hey.
Well, that's very good. I can't wait to get a chance to play it. But I got to say, Neil Jones, creator of the new video game We Never Yield, looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
So much. You're amazing. Thank you.
It's the Metro on 101.9 WDET. Coming up, speaking of video games, while this newest one is set and created by a Detroiter coming back to Detroit, there are other games in the world of video games that are based in Detroit. What do they look like? What do they have in common? We'll take a look at the history of Detroit and video games when we return. It's the Metro here on 101.9 WDET. We just heard about a new video game, again, that's going to be releasing very soon called We Never Yield, taking place in Detroit. Got us thinking a lot about the history of Detroit and video games because even though video games, relatively newer medium, back in the 80s, the development of Nintendo, we saw a lot of games coming up, but not a lot of times when Detroit was used as the setting. Well, there is still a bit of a history there, not as wide as you might think, but there are some interesting trends there. We're going to take a look at some of those games, including one of the most prominent that wears the name. The title says everything you need to know about where this game takes place.
Detroit is Quantic Dream's latest project. It takes place in the near future in the city of Detroit. We're incredibly excited to announce it.
Detroit Become Human is a 2018 adventure game developed by the French studio Quantic Dream. Set in the year 2038, the game explores a future where androids, advanced robots designed to look and act like people, are commonplace in society.
Detroit Police, what's your emergency?
This is Carl Manfred's android at 8941 Lafayette Avenue. We've just returned home and found the lights on. There may have been a break-in.
A patrol car is on the way.
For Detroit Become Human writer and director David Cage, the Motor City felt like the natural place to tell this story.
Detroit is really a fascinating place. It's a great place for industry, but also for creative people and for artists of all kinds. And we thought that, well, if one day an Android industry has to appear somewhere, it should be in Detroit. It would be a logical place in many, many ways.
As Detroit Become Human paints a vivid picture of a futuristic Detroit, another game, Deus Ex Human Revolution, gives us a glimpse of a city at the forefront of human augmentation technology.
Jensen, time to hightail it back to Detroit. Get in.
Deus Ex Human Revolution is a 2011 action role-playing game developed by Eidos Montreal. Set in a dystopian future, you play as a security specialist who's navigating a world where the line between human and machine becomes increasingly blurred.
I just heard that your team is mobilizing in Detroit. Why wasn't I informed of this sooner?
One way the game links itself to the Motor City is through references to famous street names.
Now, where's Sandoval? He has an apartment he uses when in this city, on Grand River Road. He mentioned he was feeling very run down, so I can only assume he went there.
But the most recent video game set in Detroit on this list comes from an IP many of you will be familiar with. Released in 2023, RoboCop Rogue City puts players in the shoes of Murphy, the titular RoboCop character, as he patrols the streets of Old Detroit.
Your presence here is unauthorized.
So is depriving thousands of people of a roof over their heads, but OCP doesn't seem to mind that.
Of course, it makes sense a video game featuring RoboCop would take place in Detroit, but it makes even more sense to place video games related to racing and the auto industry in the same city.
That's how it's done. You breaking that record sends a clear message. The Detroit 510s is taking over St. Louis.
In the crew, players navigate the streets of Detroit, among other major cities, for various races and missions. But the crew's not the first to use the Motor City as a backdrop for its racing. In Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, Detroit streets become one of the ultimate locations for street racing supremacy as you take on others in a battle to be the champion.
This is Detroit, Motor City. They'll race anything here. And the standards are high. Not like those punks you've been racing down in Atlanta. Here, guys care about speed, first and last.
5 of the big games to feature Detroit prominently in the video game world, 2 of them dealing in racing, 1 with a previous IP out of movies, 2 talking about the future and the mix between humans and technology, AI or mechanical. It's very interesting that those are the trends that folks from the outside think of when it comes to our city and setting games here. But what do you think of the use of Detroit in video games? Is there another game that you think should have made the list? Or are there games that you're looking for, things that you think we should use this setting for? You can email me in Austin at WDET.org and let me know, as we may revisit this title or this topic in the future. But if you're just looking to figure out how to get a game for a nephew or yourself to play taking place in the city of Detroit, those are 5 of the ones that you can do. It is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. As we are together, want to make sure that you stay cool, as it will be partly cloudy today with a high of 89. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy, high of 84. So make sure you keep cool. Maybe one of the ways you do that is by going on the river. And speaking of the river, water and fish, we'll talk a little bit about invasive carp when we return on the Metro. It is the Metro on 101.9 WDET. The Mississippi River, speaking of rivers, it's teeming with invasive carp. And these are fish that are large and hungry and could take over the Great Lakes if they get here. Governor Gretchen Whitmer recently signed an agreement to help the Army Corps of Engineers build a barrier to keep the fish from reaching Lake Michigan. Candace Miller serves as the Great Lakes Commissioner. She spoke with WDET's Pat Batchelor about the problem of invasive carp and the problems that they pose.
They're invasive, and they would very much upset the balance of the Great Lakes. So it is critically important that they be kept out. I think they were brought from Asia apparently some years ago. And they were in the rice paddies down by in the bayou, apparently. Then they had a flood, and these things got into the Mississippi River, of course, and now they're making their way up to the Great Lakes.
Did I hear you say that they eat other fish?
Oh, they eat. They have a voracious appetite, and they're enormous fish. They're huge, and they eat everything in sight. Everything that's smaller than them, which is most of our Great Lakes fish.
Wow.
Many of the different species, yeah. And they, as I say, they don't have a natural predator. So it's sort of interesting how the Army Corps is approaching this project. I was actually somewhat recently down at, they have a lab, their research and development lab down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, actually, where they took us through this lab, and of course they have these huge tanks of all these various types of Asian carp, and then they were demonstrating some of the various techniques that they think will work on stopping these fish from coming up through the pinch point there in Joliet. And so electricity, they've developed sort of an electronic barrier, which is very effective. And they were also using some natural kinds of things, they made sort of a fence, if you will, of air bubbles. So they're putting oxygen into, they've got a system there, and the fish don't like that either. So they're trying a number of different things, all with an eye toward how we absolutely must stop these invasive fish from getting up into the Great Lakes.
So tell me more about how this barrier would work.
Well, this is, as I say, sort of a pinch point there. And so, they looked, how do you stop the Mississippi River, right? And then it comes up the Chicago Diversionary Canal and then into the into the lakes here. So they looked at this spot as the best place, they say, to wage the fight, and they are developing these various systems. But it costs money, and so let me first of all say, in an age of nothing can be bipartisan, this has truly been a bipartisan effort, and I will applaud. First of all, our entire congressional delegation in Michigan and the other Great Lakes states as well. They worked very hard on getting this is a $1.14 billion project. 90% of it is coming from the federal government. And then let me also applaud our governor in Michigan and in Illinois and the state legislatures, because Michigan is bucking up $64 million, Illinois putting in $50 million. And so that's where the money's coming from. And now that they've signed this agreement with the Army Corps, it's off to the races here. So they've already done some work. They've had an electronic barrier there, but not quite enough, they don't think. So I think the first phase of this construction now will be underway very quickly. And this is just really a very good news story on a lot of different levels, but particularly us in Michigan. I mean, we are the Great Lakes state. We start with that, right? So
Right.
We must all do whatever we can to protect it in any way that we can. And this is going to be really this is an important project and a critical project.
That was Candace Miller, who serves on the Great Lakes Commission, speaking with WDET's Pat Batchelor about preventing invasive carp from getting into the Great Lakes. This is the Metro. You're listening to 1019 WDET, and President Biden plans to campaign in Detroit this Friday. It'll be his fourth visit to Michigan this year and his first since last month's debate against former President Donald Trump, in which he struggled with some of his responses. It's something that people are talking about a lot as the campaign appears to falter, which has become a little bit more evident after polls have been released, some showing trailing support, with Trump leading current President Joe Biden 49 to 43%. On the latest episode of WDET's political podcast Mishmash, host Shana Roth and Gongwer News Services' Zach Gorchow spoke about the presidential race. They began this conversation by discussing one Democratic Michigander who has been floated by some to replace Biden in the presidential race.
Some of Biden's answers to even softball-type questions have left many concerned about his ability to beat former President Donald Trump in November. Now, a handful of names have been floated as people who could step up if Biden were to step down. And Whitmer seems to have gained an incredible amount of traction in a short amount of times with calls for her to be the nominee. So let's start here, Zach. Is Whitmer the great hope for Democrats?
Well, among some Democrats, she's the great hope, but, they're seeing a popular governor of a Midwest swing state where there are several swing states. Governor Whitmer won twice by large margins. And, with President Biden at his lowest ebb, I think, since his first campaign for president in 2020, she does strike people as a salve, maybe the answer. But most Democrats, and that includes Whitmer herself, would say Biden is the nominee and he will remain the nominee. Biden stepping down as the nominee less than 2 months before the convention, and it is his call. He cannot be ousted, would create massive chaos, many Democrats say.
And Whitmer has repeatedly said in the past that she would not run for president this term. She wouldn't do it in the primary. She keeps saying now that she has no plans for this. But the atmosphere still feels a little different, no?
Big time. I mean, I feel like I can't go anywhere without seeing an article that has Gretchen Whitmer in the top 2 or 3 of potential stand-ins. His debate performance, the president's, has turned the whispers into roars among Democrats that his declining strength as a speaker and visual presence at the age of 81 could lead to the return of Donald Trump to the White House. But all indications right now are Biden plans to remain the nominee. Thus, Whitmer, who we should mention is co-chair of the Biden campaign, will continue to help him not launch her own bid. Further, there are other big-name Democrats out there who would run should Biden bow out.
Yeah. Whitmer keeps saying the call is not coming from inside the House, but there was a story in Politico this week where an unnamed potential presidential rival of Whitmer's tried to convince the writer of the article that she, Whitmer, had told the Biden campaign Michigan was no longer winnable. That was not what Whitmer said. Apparently, she only indicated the debate would make Michigan more difficult. And the governor, who loves herself, a good four-letter word, said on Twitter or X that anyone claiming she said Biden couldn't win Michigan is full of married with it.
Well done, Shayna. My takeaway from that article in Politico is that Washington folks, particularly those around Vice President Kamala Harris, remember her, the most obvious successor, should the unlikely happen, and Biden hang it up, are eyeing with a very wary eye Whitmer's growing national profile. She has a book coming out next week and a national book tour lined up. She's been barnstorming the country, showing up at flashy events far from our fair Water Winter Wonderland, and I'm wearing my special new Water Winter Wonderland shirt, thanks to the store that I got that from, like the Aspen Institute. She visited swing states for Biden, but also is stopping in non-competitive states like Texas to speak to Democrats. These are the kinds of things someone does when they have the presidency on the brain, perhaps in 2028.
This attempt to wound her in the Politico story felt a bit like what you told me is a welcome to the NFL moment in national Democratic politics, which is something that I wasn't very familiar of, but it seems as though that means it's an acknowledgement that she's in the big leagues and she needs to be here to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Big time. In the end, though, this is Biden's call. By virtue of his winning the Democratic primaries, the convention delegates are his. If Whitmer is eyeing the White House, and she insists she does not know what she will do in 2028 when she will no longer be the governor, she's likely waiting 4 more years.
That was Shayna Roth and Gongwer News Services' Zach Gorchow on WDET's political podcast, Mishmash. This is The Metro. You are listening to 1019 WDET, and coming up, we're going to discuss a new summer concert series put on by the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. The summer season means summer music, but what's better than just listening to music? Easy. Listening to it outside with friends and family, and that's exactly what the Detroit Symphony Orchestra is offering this summer between July 10th and the 21st. Located at 51 Parsons in Midtown, the DSO will host a free music festival known as Summer in Sosnick. To discuss the festival now, we have Jeremy Crosmer, a cellist with and composer with the DSO, with us. Jeremy, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much.
Hey, I'm looking forward to any free event where I can hear music outside, so that sounds great. But can you let us know a little bit about what the Summer in Sosnick Festival is all about?
Yes, so we have a number of offerings. We are collaborating with local artists and cultural organizations, and we are here to present a celebration of live arts in Detroit. So we have a number of events, starting with a concert that I'm curating with my DSO colleagues called Dancing Down Woodward, which is a mix of pop music with classical music. So we have covers of music by Lizzo, Eminem, and Jack White, and classical music by Mason Bates and Aaron J. Kernis. I'm joined, this is Wednesday, July 10th at 7 p.m. at the Sosnick Courtyard, and I'll be joined by my colleagues, violinist Will Hopanimi, principal flute Hannah Hamill, and principal clarinet Ralph Sciano. After that, the rest of the 2-week festival will have yoga events, a poetry slam, and sensory-friendly offerings, and all of these events are free and open to the public There are VIP tickets that are available as well. And it's just a great chance to celebrate live arts in Detroit.
Yeah, and this idea of playing popular music, we've heard of the pops sometimes, right? You get a full orchestra that plays classic tracks, maybe movie themes, all popular music. You're doing this with a chamber ensemble? What's that setup? I heard clarinet in there. What are you doing there? What's the breakdown for instruments?
Yeah, we've got violin, clarinet, flute, and cello. And it's a very interesting combination of instruments. Some of the music that we're doing, of course, is rap by Eminem. And so you're going to hear our principal clarinet, Ralph Sciano, actually play that rap on his clarinet. And it's pretty incredible to hear it's blend of classical virtuosity with the popular element.
Now, something you have to think about with popular music, especially rap, we got to get that low end. And as much as I love the cello, right? How do you get that, that low end that gives you that vibration with such a chamber ensemble? How are you going to pull that off?
That's a great question. So we will be mic'd.
Okay.
And in addition to that, I'll be doing some special effects on my cello, which includes maybe slapping the fingerboard, slapping the body of the instrument. Of course, it won't damage the instrument, but when you hear that with the microphone, it does add a lot of bass to it.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about your work with the classical world and then branching into more popular forms of music, is that a fun thing for you to get out there and do that? Or how do you think about this orchestration? I mean, what's the difference for you playing those classical tracks versus trying to delve into more of this popular music?
This is a sort of specialty of mine that I've been delving into over the past decade. It started with some Motown arrangements that I did that I've called Motown Reimagined. And I just love the idea of combining classical with pop music because I think it's a good entry point for people who are on both sides. So all of us have our predilections. But for people who maybe wouldn't go to a Beethoven concert as their first Detroit Symphony concert, this is a great chance for them to hear what classical instruments are capable of and maybe experience some of the, emotion and vigor and virtuosity that you would hear from a classical piece, but in the context of pop music.
We're speaking with Jeremy Crosmer, who's a cellist and composer with the DSO. And Jeremy is someone who's also a lover of classical music. I know sometimes I can feel like it's a little bit of a challenge to get some of the folks to listen to some tracks. One way I try to do it is by showing them some of the remarkable samples from classical music that can be used in hip-hop music. But for you, when it comes to kind of gatewaying people, letting them know about those jams we heard from Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich, what do you feel like are the best things that you can do out there to get people in, maybe learn a little bit more about the classical world?
Well, I know we're on the radio, but I always say that live music is incomparable. So I recommend just showing up to a concert live and hearing it. We also webcast our concerts, so people can experience that online if they want to at first. But there's nothing like being in a space with musicians and hearing the music live.
I know one of the performances in looking at the schedule that gets some of us fired up, including our producer, Sam Corey, who would get on me if I didn't ask this, is that Urban Art Orchestra Summer Madness. I love that title. Does that mean you're playing Kool and the Gang on that one? What is going on with that?
So I'm not part of that ensemble, but that's just an example of one of the collaborations that Detroit Symphony has, bringing in local artists. I know the Urban Art Ensemble did play for the opening of the Michigan Central train station a couple weeks ago, and I have some friends that play in that group, and that's a pretty incredible group, so I wouldn't want to miss that one either.
Yeah. Is there anything that you're looking forward to this summer that shows that connection again with some of the local artists? You mentioned some of the things, but what are the items that really stick out to you?
I'm a big proponent for jazz. I love everything jazz, so I would definitely try to attend events like that. One of my colleagues, Chris Johnson, who has worked with Detroit Symphony a lot, does a number of events in the summers. So look out for those. Again, we have yoga, we have poetry slam, and all of our events have sensory-friendly offerings. So it's just something fun for the entire family to attend.
I love this idea of yoga also with the classical music. That means you're going to take that down a little bit more serene there to get that performance? Or how are you planning to incorporate yoga into some of the music that we're going to see that summer? or this summer?
The performances I've done in the past with combining yoga with classical music, we actually have selected pretty difficult classical music. Some of it's more upbeat, and I think the yoga instructors understand that there is sort of arc to the process of going through music and going through all the motions for yoga. And so some of the music can get pretty upbeat, and then, like you said, it ends up winding down by the end of the concert.
Looking forward to that. Jeremy Crosmer, cellist and composer for the DSO, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks, Nick.
And that's going to do it for this edition, Monday, July 8th. You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt, and additional production support from Anel Scott and Sydney Walkley. Our engineer is Nate Bender, and the music is by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll talk again tomorrow.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.